Hello everyone, welcome to Business Analytics Programming. This is week 8. In the past few weeks, we have learned a lot about Python. For today, we're going to talk about functions. Functions is a very important piece of any programming. In Python, it is the same, and it is very important to learn how to write a function, because function give you the ability to pack all the functionalities within particular function, such that in the future you do not need to rewrite anything within that function. You just call the function name and it's going to do the appropriate task for you. And anything can be a particular function. And for example, we have the internal function of input. So even though we do not know how Python make it happen, but the input function is going to take whatever you put into the text box to return that value to your main program. And any predefined operation probably is defined as a function, and it can be defined as function. So the function is so important, but to define a function is actually relatively simple. So in this particular example here, to define a function, we first use def as the keyword to basically tell the program, okay, I'm going to define a function, so I use def. The def space, and this great user, this particular one is the function name. You can name your function with whatever name you want, but in Python, it is typically a good idea to make the function name meaningful, such that in the future, when you call the function, you know what exactly it is going to do. That's the function name, and after the function name, there are the parentheses. Within the parentheses, actually, is the parameters. Parameters is very important to the function. You can have 0 parameters, 1 parameters, 2 parameters, and many other parameters in your function. The parameter basically provide a pipeline such that you can pass useful information to your function, such that whatever within the function body can work on it. And then after the parentheses, we have the colon here, which is indicating, okay, I'm defining function. Now that's the body of the function. After the first line, we are going to see the indentation. Indentation again is used to define the function body. And within the function body, the first line you see a kind of a string is enclosed a triple quotation mark. This is called a docstring. Basically, when Python create a document for a particular function, they're going to actually display that piece of information for what is this function about. So this is basically tells user what is the function is really doing for you. And this particular simple function is display a simple greeting. And the username here is a parameter. And the parameter is actually, when you call the function, you can pass the parameter through the username. And once the parameter is defined in the function, and is actually can be used in the body. For example, in this print statement here, I use the username.title method. We know that we're going to actually convert whatever the string in the username. The first letter will be capitalized. And then, so that's a very simple function. You defined a very simple function in this particular case. The function name is greetUser. Once the function is defined, you can actually use it. For example, you put in greet_user with Jesse as a string as the input to your parameter, and then, as we expected, it's going to print out the greeting, the greeting for Jesse, as well as the welcome to BUSA 493.523 here, which is part of the function, the function's body. So that's the whole process. Is in that particular one, when we call the function greetUser, the value of the function parameter which is called argument. So the username is parameter, and now when we actually call the function, we pass Jesse as the argument to the parameter, and this argument is passed through the function, through the parameter, just like a pipe. So Jesse is the username, and the username will be used in the function body to do any methodology that is defined in the function. So that's how a function is defined, as well as a function can be called. Okay, as we can see in the simple example, we pass the Jesse as the argument to the function. We can actually pass 0, 1, 2, 3, or multiple arguments depending on how many parameters when you define the function. In that particular example, we have 3 parameters within that function: username, and basically that's a combine a user's name. That simple function is going to combine user's name. There are 3 parameters: first, medium, and last, which represent the first name, middle name, and last name. And then within the function, it's actually going to combine the first, middle, and last name together, and then print the full name. Use the first capital letter. The first letter will be capital letter. So this is how the function is actually defined. There are 2 different ways you can pass argument to the function. The first one is by matching the position. So when you define the parameter, the first, middle, and last, their position is the first, second, and third position. When you actually provide 3 arguments to the function, they are actually matched by position. When you call the username John Q Lee, in this particular case, the John is going to match to the first, Q is going to match middle, Lee is going to match the last. And when you combine the name together, you can see it's going to print out John Q Lee as we expected. The first, middle, and last, those are actually matched by position. And the second way you call function and pass argument is by keywords. Because we already defined the function's parameter are first, middle, and last, we can also do, basically when we call the function, we define, for example, middle is equal to P, last equal to river, and first equal to Mary. Then the function is going to check, okay, I'm going to pass P to middle, I'm going to pass rivers to last, and I'm going to pass Mary to first. In that particular case, when you are using keywords, that is basically using the parameter equal argument in your function call, the position actually doesn't matter. The only thing matters is the parameter and argument pair. And the Python is going to automatically assign those argument to the right parameter and pass it to the function. So that's 2 different ways you can pass argument. And when you write your own function and when you do the exercise in today's homework, you're going to learn and practice by pass argument, both by position as well as by keywords. Okay, default value. So sometimes you do not want, sometimes when you actually provide argument to your functions, and you can, when you write the function, you can actually provide some default value, which means if the user when they call the function, if they do not provide the particular argument for a parameter which has a default value, and then those default value will be used throughout the function. So it gave the user some flexibility. And in this particular one, we're still using the function called the username, but now I keep the middle which is optional. To define an optional argument, basically in your function definition step, you use the middle equal to something. When you have this parameter equal to something, when you define the function, it's basically become a parameter with a default value. And please remember, when you have parameters with default value and parameters without default value, always put all your parameters without default value first, and then group all your parameters without default value at the end of the parameter list when you define a function. So once you define the function, then we can call it. For example, the username John and Lee, using position matching, they're going to match the position first and last. Because we didn't provide any argument for the middle, so it is going to use the default value, that is J. So when we actually call the function, it's going to plot John, J, Lee as we expected. So the second one, when we call that, we're still using we're now using a keyword match to pass the argument. We define the last equal to reverse and first equal to Mary, and then we didn't provide any middle value as well. So the default value J is going to be used on the second line. But once you have a default value, which not necessarily means you cannot provide a middle a argument for middle. You can overwrite the default value by a different value once you actually specifically define what is the value or the argument for that parameter. So in the third example here, when we call the function, we specifically define the middle equal to k and last and first. This is still a keyword match to pass the parameter value to the parameter, and then we can see now the middle name is no longer the default value J but become a K. So this is how we can define a default value in the parameter and how we can call a function with a default value parameter. Basically, you can omit this parameter with default value, or you can assign this parameter with some other values other than the default value. And another very similar concept is a function that one of the parameter that the argument is optional. The optional, which means sometimes in this getName example, some people just do not have a middle name. In that particular case, the middle equal to a string which is there's nothing between the quotation mark. This is defined as the middle become a optional. So so the user can provide the middle here, or the user does not provide the middle. Both will be fine. And there's no default value for the middle as well. The default basically is empty. Is an empty string in this particular case. And in this function here, if middle, that is basically if middle is empty, it will be true. It will be false. If middle is not empty, it's become true. So if there are something for the middle, the user provide, and then it's going to execute this line. Otherwise, if the user does not provide any input for the middle, it's going to execute this line. So the final answer basically is still still will return a particular string in that particular case. But but in this particular case, the middle, this parameter, is really optional. The user can provide or not, and it is not a default value because it's just empty. There's no value for the middle. For the return value, that is when we actually define a function, some of the tasks can be done within the function, like we ask the function to print out something. But sometimes we want the function to return a value to the main program such that we can use that value for the future analysis or the future actions in the main program. So in this particular case, we're going to leverage the return value from a function. So the return value is defined usually at the end of the function by a keyword return and follow a variable name after that. So by doing this, when we call a particular function, that variable will be returned as the value of the function. For example, when we call a particular function, when we call the function in the past, we just use the username and without utilize its return value. To actually get its return value, you just put a particular parameter name, a particular variable name, the equal sign. On the right side of the equal sign, you put in your function call. In that particular one, we have the username, the function name, and we actually pass the argument to the parameters by using keyword. And then after we call that, the one underscore name is going to have the value from this return value. We know after we put in the middle, last, and the first, the full name become Mary K. Rivers. That become the value of the return value. And because we are actually using the return value as the value when we call a function, so the one name have the content of Mary K. Rivers after we run this line. And actually we can print the content for that variable, and we see it is Mary K. Rivers. In this particular one, we print everything into a uppercase. The return value, you can return a vector, you can return a scalar, you can even return a dictionary too. So the return value can be anything. And in this example below, we are actually return a dictionary as a return value. In this particular one, there are two names, first and last, and we define a person, which is basically dictionary, and their key value pair will be, the key will be first, last, the value will be first and last. Whenever we actually pass through the function, we're going to return a dictionary as a return value. So in this particular one, we actually call the username, the Mary and Rivers, and then it's become a dictionary. We print out a dictionary like those. So the return value is very important because when we actually call a particular function, it's actually give us some value returned from the function, such that those function and those value can be used in the downstream analysis. This is a very important topic as well. When we pass the argument to the parameter, we can pass a single value. We can also pass a list as the argument. For list, it's a little bit special because let's for example in this particular function here, when we define that particular function, that is a delete paths. Basically, you're going to provide a list of paths as the input to the list paths, and then you actually define a path you're going to want to delete from that list. So in this particular example, in this particular example, this is the function we defined, and it's going to remove a particular path into your path list and print it out. So let's see how we can pass the argument. First, we need to define a list which has all the information you want. In this one, we have 4 elements: dog, cat, fish, and bird. And then I have the choice to delete, which I put into as cat. Then I call the function of delete path, my path, which is the 4 the list with 4 elements, and choice is cat. So basically, when I call this function, it is going to basically delete the cat from the list and print it out, which give me only dog, fish, and bird. And now you may wonder, okay, I passed my pets as the list to the function. If that is going to automatically modify the list in the main program, the answer is yes. Now if you print my pets, which initially there are 4, and now you're not sure whether it's 4 or 5, 4 or 3, you'll find out it is 3. Basically, when you pass a list by its list name, so you basically pass the entire list into the function, and any change to the list is permanent. Basically, in the main program, you have the parameter, you have the name my pets. Anything we removed within the function, it will be removed from the main program as well. So now the second method is actually pass the list with this square bracket with the colon after that, which means it's actually going to pass a copy of my pets into the function, and anything that is done to the my pets, the copy of the my pet, is not going to be reflected in the list in the main program. For example, we have the 4 element in my initial list, and then I call that function. Now I pass actually a copy. When I pass a copy of my pets, so it's going to actually work on the copy of the list. So it's going to remove cat and print it out. So I see dog, fish, bird, and no more cat when I call the function. But it's not going to be changed. It's not going to change my original list. So when I print my original list, it still have the cat inside. So by using the square bracket and the colon inside, so you actually didn't pass your original list. You pass a copy of your list into the function for the function to do some actions, and anything that is done with your copy, it is not going to be reflected in your original list in the main program. So this is basically 2 different ways you can pass a list as an argument. You can pass the list itself, or pass a copy of the list to the function. And any manipulation are permanent if you pass the list itself into a function, and if you pass a copy of the function, anything that you do to your copy is not going to be reflected in the original list in the main program. So that is all for today for the function, and we didn't finish the chapter 8 because function is a so huge important concept. We're going to continue next week. So for this week, please read page 133 to 150 of chapter 8 of the textbook, and tap and run all the Python codes between page 133 and 150 in chapter 8 of the textbook with the Jupyter Notebook in your local computer. Then save your notebook with code and run result into an HTML file and submit to the eCollege. For 523 students, there is an additional step. Basically, at page 150 of the textbook, try it yourself. And there are 3 components, 8-9, 8-10, and 8-11. Finish them in a Jupyter Notebook in your local computer, and save your notebook with code and run result to a HTML file and submit to the college. So this 3 component in this try it yourself is basically very similar to the code that I list right here. So you basically will run your code twice. Once is with the list itself, and the second one is the list as a send a copy of a list to your functions, and you first need to define your function and call your function separately. And remember, you can use the return at the end return at the end of the function to change the name and then to make it returned from a function. So this is very similar to here, and remember you can use the return function at the end to return the value that you modified to the main program. Okay, that's all for today.